Every damn day.
Hello, everyone. It's Jerry at the Fledge, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 41 of Every Damn Day. And today we have our great friend Troy, and we're here to talk about domestic abuse and domestic violence, building a coalition that's statewide, and some of the issues that we think need to be resolved fairly quickly. So how you doing today, Troy?
I'm doing awesome, Jerry. Thank you for having us here today. It's a great opportunity for us to introduce our work and also to highlight what you're doing here, which is awesome.
Well, I appreciate that. You and I have been friends for a few years now. You've been doing advocacy work around the state for a bit of time.
It's been about 5 years now.
Yeah, so glad to have you back. First time you've been in the Fledge in a couple of years, I think.
It's been a couple of years, and I'm back in the field again. I took some time off of work. Policy work can be challenging. You have to work with so many people from so many different places, and the goal is to try to change minds and hearts. And that takes a lot of energy from one person or a team, even an organization. It just consumes you. So off time is good time, and then it's time to get back to work.
I get the sense you're like an empath too. You feel other people's pain, so that kind of secondary trauma can really build up, right?
It's painful. So when you go to work and have to talk about your experiences to try to move legislation a certain way and impact the community and legislators, it can be a little painful. And then when you go home at the end of the day, you take home these open wounds that you've revisited, and then have to recover from that. And so it does take time and effort and a strong supportive community as well.
Yeah. And but it becomes therapy too, right? It's therapeutical.
It's consequential therapy.
Yeah.
You know, it's therapy with complications, and consequences, but it's also cathartic too. You do get it out of you, and the more you talk about your personal experiences or what it's like to have to help someone out of a really dire situation that may have impacted their entire life, and you can make a change in that, it does feel good too at the end of the day. So it's a double-edged sword.
It's tough work, but it's good work.
Absolutely.
So let's get into what you've been doing. How you want to start? However you want to start.
So I'll start with my last round of work in the state of Michigan was around the Clean Slate campaign. I was a grassroots leader for that movement. We're so glad that it passed. It's going to affect about 2 million people in our state over the next 5 years. What it does is it helps people get convictions off of their record and have it clean slate, wiped clean. And so now they can go access housing, employment, education without being discriminated against. And then my world changed a little bit, and I wound up taking a trip to Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee, to a place called Thistle Farms, where they work with women who've been trafficked in the sex trade. I came back to Michigan and kind of reflected on what I had learned there. I met another future colleague who was also attending that conference, and human trafficking was such a big issue, and then again, such a small issue. It depends on how it's impacting people. And where we landed was it still falls in the realm of domestic abuse, fractured and damaged relationships. So as we started to look into the world of domestic abuse, the systems, the services, the policies that are in place here in Michigan, we've identified a number of gaps that really concerned us. And it wound up that domestic abuse wound up being the topic of our work, but also I anticipate being a pretty much career, lifelong type of work that's coming up, because it's a problem that we know is going to be hard to address, especially alone. That's why our goal is coalition development.
Yeah, and it's a big problem. You have some numbers.
Well, I guess I could start off with what might be perceived as a simple number. In the state of Michigan, there's over 100 reported incidents where physical injury occurs as a result of incidents in relationship, which we call domestic. And
100 or
100,000
yeah, okay.
Annually. And we've also experienced that over the past decade, that on an average 100 people die as a result of intimate partner abuse, domestic abuse in the home, and also affecting people who are not directly tied to an individual. People on the fringes are even killed as a result of domestic abuse. So it's a complicated and very sensitive topic.
Oh, someone trying to intervene or get in the middle of it, or kind of an innocent bystander.
Person moves on their life and they become targeted. So there's a number of variables that domestic abuse impacts people.
Yeah. And like most statistics we have, it's just an estimate. It's what's reported. It's not what's not reported.
Right. So we report about 100,000 injuries a year. The problem is like, how do you stop that? How do you stop the injuries from happening? And that's one of the things that we discovered also is around the issue of personal protection orders.
Yeah.
And they are more complicated to have in place to protect a person than one may think. So that's another one of the challenge areas that we found. And actually in the state of Michigan, I almost want to say it was limited to Kent County. However, the Michigan state only reported 22 personal protection orders that were actually filed out of 1,200 that were filed. I want to say in the state, but I almost have a limit to Kent County for some reason.
Yeah.
Because I've just been studying.
But if we just go to percentages, 22 out of 1,200.
That's less than 1%.
Yeah.
And so now when you have that, you have to ask the question, how many people call a 911 line and saying, I am in danger and I need help? And law enforcement shows up and there's no solid infrastructure, no community who will come along and support that officer, but also support the people who are having a dispute in their home or wherever it may be. That system's broken. Yeah. And we believe that it really needs to be shored up. So when you talk about 22 people who completed a personal protection order all the way to its place where it's in standing, you have to ask the question, what happens to that other 1,000 or so people?
Yeah. And
then how many of them wind up being reoffended again and ultimately and unfortunately, which we hate to see, but also fatally. Yeah. So we like to get those numbers up, and we have a system that we believe would make a major impact in people's safety when it comes down to reporting domestic abuse.
All right. So I want to get to that, but I want to go back a little bit. And I want to go back to somebody calls 911. Yep. The police show up. It might be the first time they've ever shown up there. It might be the 9th time that they've shown up there. What's happening during that time? That police officer, not that we know what's going through their mind, but what's sort of going through their mind there?
Yeah, I would speculate by saying that what we've done as a society, which would also impact the impressions of law enforcement showing up to a domestic call, is we see it so much in the news. It's tragic. We kind of tune out of the tragic. Mm-hmm. We see it on television and in our culture today. That's just the way we interact with each other. So what we've done is we've minimized the harm that's being done by domestic abuse as dangerous to drama. And so there might be 9 calls to that house. And we have a case out of Detroit that we've been following, and who's also a partner of ours now, in where a woman's sister was murdered after more than 10 incidents of this individual having contact with the police. And a woman separated herself. She was separated for over 90 days from him, and she had been experiencing financial abuse. And so he was in control of the money. He determined what she would have to go and start over a new life with 2 daughters. And what happened was he lured her to a gas station. Ironically, it was a mile from her home in Detroit. Lured her to a gas station, texted her for an entire hour, making sure that she came with the intent to give her some money. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, while she sat in the vehicle with him for 20 minutes, whatever they discussed, and it ended with him shooting her in the head, and he killed himself as well. After the fact, the prosecutors and law enforcement are saying, how did this happen? This man should have never had the opportunity to be able to do this to her. Unfortunately, I think that they're reflecting on just the brokenness of the system. Because at some point after these points of intervention, 1, 2, 3, 8, 10, at some point somebody has to say there's another way that we need to deal with this, and we really haven't found that way yet.
Yeah. When you're saying that 1, 2, 3, 8, 10, and I'm thinking about that cop that shows up the first time, he's taking it serious. The second time, he's starting to wonder, is it just drama? Is it real? The fifth time, he's probably thinking, why does she keep going back? Or he, for that matter. We should remove gender from this.
Sure, yeah.
But there's a statistic, right? It takes somebody 8 times to try to leave before they can actually be successful.
If that's an actual factual statistic, I like to see it, but I would agree with it. It is supportive. And I say that because all abuse has a psychological impact first. You're conditioning a person to start to accept your way. And that might be, so when we talk about the difficulty of leaving, there's that psychological component first. What has happened to me in the past? What will happen to me if I say I want to leave? What will happen if I leave and they find me? Yeah. So that makes it extremely difficult. And, people do ask the question, why? Why don't you just leave? And the answer could be, what do you think is going to happen when I do? Or what have you seen happen before in the past when I have left? Mm-hmm. People don't really have the type of support system they need to actually leave. So you have the psychological abuse, the emotional abuse. A person may have pets. A person may have no control of their finances whatsoever. They may have children with another person who gets pulled into the conversation or the tool that's used by the abuser. So there's a number of factors that contribute to a person not leaving the first or the second or the fifth or the 10th time. And that even might ultimately lead to their severe physical harm that they'll never recover from. We also heard the story of a wonderful woman who 40 years ago had her neck broken by her boyfriend and also her leg at the same time and never recovered from it.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to say why a person is staying, but we can't answer that question because the question is that person's in danger, and our responsibility as advocates and as a community who all these people are members of, that they need to have the right, inherent human right to feel safe, especially in their own home, but also to be made safe by their community and also the government's offices that we have in place to do that.
Yeah. And one of those things is a PPO, right? A personal protection order, in case nobody knows that.
Yep.
The process for getting a PPO, serving the PPO and all of that is weird to me. I mean, that weird's not the right word. It baffles me that this is the process. Would you mind telling us what that process looks like?
We'll start off with, just imagine being in a relationship with the person that you've been with for a significant amount of time. You perhaps have been married to them, you may have been dating them, or you just may have had a relationship with them. And that's what we call where the relationships are fractured. That's when we start to talk about what becomes abusive in a relationship. So the first step is a person would want to have the will to actually leave or to be separated from that person they care about. And then they'll go to their county clerk, usually it's attached to the courthouse, and they'll file a complaint. And they say, these are the reasons why I'm afraid of the person that I really care about or who's supposed to care about me. And you file a document with the clerk, they'll go bring it before the judge, and the judge will find cause to or to not approve your application for protection, actually. Mm-hmm. And then you go back to the clerk and receive it, and then the clerk tells you that you have to give her or provide someone with $150. Now, again, go back to financial abuse. If my money is being controlled, I don't have any money to pay for a service that would serve to protect me. So that's one of the things that we want to see happen, is that personal protection orders should not be paid for. And that's because what I'm doing is I'm essentially paying for my safety, in which I'm supposed to be protected, and no financial burden should be placed on the victim. So after that personal protection order is approved and I somehow find the money, or a person, which is another thing that we hope to see change, I should not be asking Jerry, my friend, to go serve a personal protection order on anyone in my community, because number one, it will continue to fracture relationships. As soon as you go inject yourself in this domestic situation, you become adversarial to somebody. Mm-hmm. And the second reason why you shouldn't be doing that is you're not trained. People still have weapons in their home. Do you know that the Michigan State Police do not remove a firearm from a person's home who has been charged with a domestic case. So now when you have someone who shows up to go serve that personal protection order, they're at risk of potentially being harmed even with a firearm.
So if you haven't been convicted yet, you still get to keep your weapon, or even after conviction? After
conviction, you're told by what we call the honor system to give your weapon up, and then if you're caught with it, you have additional consequences. But Michigan State Police require you to turn in your weapon, and they revoke your firearm certification. So the next step is, did you have another question?
No.
The next step is after you found the means to have someone serve this personal protection order, you have to have it back refiled again with the court. So you have to take this document and go back to the court again and say, here, I have served this person. And then if that person feels that their order has been violated, they have to go back to the court again, serve another paper, and have that served on that person again. And each time that person is getting served with a personal protection order, I would assume that they're getting upset even more and more. And they're still available to move around. And the consequence that they know is that if I get caught again, I may go to jail. So you have to go through service twice, and after you've served twice, then it's actually a matter of not having an opportunity occur where a person would have to call the police again and then have that person put in jail. And it would only be for 90 days after another hearing, whether the judge determines that this person has actually violated the order. That's why we only see 22 completely processed out of thousands in our state. And
the thousands is probably a much lower number, because once you go through that process once and it fails, why waste your time again, right?
I know a number of people who are fully competent and capable of navigating a system, and for them, with means, with money, with support, is very difficult. I know a person who's been dealing with that for over 2 months now, and have the means, have the support. Transportation is another one. What happens if an incident occurs in a county and you need to you reside in another county, but that's your only county of interaction now? And so, keys are taken. I don't have transportation. There's all these nuanced scenarios to a person's situation that, can't be quantified. However, we know that at the end of the day, the process is failing our people. Yeah. And we don't believe that they should be charged a dollar amount to have this filed. We do believe that there can be a better relationship between law enforcement, civilians, and advocates. And we definitely do believe that the victims should be protected at a higher level in our state.
Yeah. So for some reason, I've talked to a lot of people who have tried to get PPOs before. Even that step, getting past the judge, is difficult, right? They want to see a lot of evidence. They want to see, you almost have to get hurt pretty bad to even have the evidence that you need to keep you from being hurt pretty bad.
Yeah, there's a number of ways. So you can have physical harm that's been done to you that you can document and show, and a judge will honor that pretty much straight away. And then you can have physical damage, perhaps your vehicle or your home or something that's valuable. Maybe somebody breaks your phone and they do it, maliciously, so you have no more means of communication. But a judge will be pretty favorable to a person who's applying for a personal protection order. The only thing is, we see abuses in that area too, where a person could file for a protection order and not really be the person who's in need. And they'll use it as another tool to continue to abuse somebody. Because if you have a personal protection order against somebody, you can still communicate with them one way. But as soon as that person, and you can do it in whatever fashion you like, until that person says this person's abusing the protection that you've given them, because actually I'm the one who's an abuser. So it can get very complicated and tangled sometimes. And there's a way to filter that. And we believe that it's by virtue of, what does the point of encounter look like? What does the history look like? And then also talking to other people and seeing, is this a legitimate need where someone needs to be protected from somebody else, or are they actually using this as a tool to continue to abuse someone?
Right.
So you have to kind of weigh in the balance a judge's discernment when something comes in front of them, because we've seen PPOs turned down before. And We work through those, but at times you can see that this is the type of a situation where a person was in need. There's more going on here, and usually it becomes a lever that someone uses to keep control over a person.
Yeah. And you were talking earlier about, the incident happened in one county, but you lived in another county. There's a problem with the data too, right?
Correct.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So the breakdown that we've also experienced in serving people is when you have a incident that occurred in, let's say, Wayne County, and you move to Ingham County. If the abuser were to show up in Ingham County and continue practices of abuse, and you contact the Ingham County Sheriff, they won't have any record, or the police, they won't have any record of what case has not been disposed of yet. So if there wasn't a conviction, then they wouldn't have evidence of the history of the abuse that's occurring. So one of the things that we're hoping to do is to work very closely with somebody who I will not name unless they decide so themselves, is to design a system, a software information and data system that, number one, holds the perpetrators accountable, but number two, creates that database for all the relevant stakeholders, government agencies, law enforcement, advocates, to all contribute into this base of information, so that whether a person is going to seek services in another county or needing the support of law enforcement in another county, then they can access this database, which we call, it's a virtual hub. And we're also working on a secondary physical place that would be a hub for this entire state. And if I can, just from the conversation that we had, I'll thank you publicly for not only giving us the opportunity to speak here, but also to do some hub work here as we interface with the Capitol, where decisions are made around policies, but also with the people in this community, because we have to start somewhere, bringing all the stakeholders together so that we can address this issue together.
Well, this problem, we've seen it get bigger and bigger and bigger from the Fledge's perspective and people that we're working with. One, because, part of it is they trust us now. We've got that relationship with a lot of people where they will tell us that this is happening. But also, COVID was a nightmare for abusive relationships, right? Because if you're trapped in the house, but at least you can go to work, at least you can go to school, at least you can go to the grocery store, and then we have a lockdown, that's a nightmare situation. What have you kind of seen in that space?
Well, I think imagine if you're being abused, not going to work anymore. If your abuser is a worker and you're perhaps a homemaker or stay-at-home dad, that person isn't going home anymore. So we talk about complex trauma and how COVID has affected so many people in so many different ways. Nobody's escaped the trauma of COVID. I just want to allude to one thing before I get into the impact of COVID. What we did learn from COVID, on a very extremely positive note, exactly what we're trying to demonstrate. I had the privilege of sitting in a room of foundations that their net worth collectively was about $500 billion. And what we've experienced with organizations who do this kind of work, one of the things that makes us less likely to interact with each other and work collaboratively is the fight for money. Mm-hmm. And so I would say one of the problems is a false assumption of scarcity. There's plenty of money for this stuff. There are a number of people who would like to be able to do this stuff, and it's really hard to ask people to do full-time work as a volunteer. Right. We know that funds are being cut to the state. Funds are being cut to services that actually are there to meet the need, but they really haven't found a way to adapt to everybody being locked in their house. So what we've seen is the incidents of domestic abuse have went down. Children aren't going to school anymore either. So those are 3 touch points where people will potentially have the opportunity to say, I'm being abused, I need help. There's something that I can't handle myself. I saw there's a sign that when people do this, it means like, I need help. But a person can't even go into a Walmart and walk down the aisle and do this because we're all cooped up in our houses. At least we have been for a while. So
COVID took voices away.
COVID silenced quite a few people, and a lot of people suffered as a result of it. And it just hasn't been documented. If there was a murder in a home, quite often it happens that it was just a murder that happened. Yeah. and we don't label it as domestic abuse. But the one thing that did come out of COVID that we're really trying to follow after is, if you can imagine Sparrow Hospital and the other local hospitals, stores, even people in stores are handing out masks. Foundations have come together and said this is like a real problem. And what we discovered is that usually the people that you wouldn't see working together, even when they're competing for dollars, everybody's come together now, and they're working to address one common problem, and that problem is COVID. Now, if we were to put COVID into the context of the lingering, persistent presence of domestic abuse, we would say on the scales, like COVID falls far beneath the range of impact on our society as a whole, daily, and even in our culture. So going forward, we like to continue to challenge people, again, from cross-agency, cross-advocate organizations, and even just your average person. Put a sticker in the window, and we can figure out what that's like, to declare spaces safe, because apart from each other, this problem is so enormous that there's no way that we will be able to do it as an organization, as a coalition to oppose domestic abuse, or any other organizations who's out there. They're filling a gap. They have a finger in a dam, but it's never going to stop flowing until we work together to say, what does a healthy relationship look like in our home, in our day-to-day lives as students, in academic spaces, colleagues and workspaces. You know, it's all domestic. It's all based on relationships. And the question is will they be abusive or affirming? And, you know, we like to move toward the affirming lane, because that's where we know that we thrive as a people, when we work together.
Yeah.
And we learned that from like the civil rights movement.
And you're touching all my buttons, man. Scarcity causes so much of a problem. Not working together, competing, not collaborating for whatever ego reason or financial reason. We got to do something about that.
Yeah, it's kind of like, just real quick, it's just an analogy. It's kind of like, you know, you have a forest area, or even in a urban area, you have an ecosystem of all the things needed to make that thing function. Mm-hmm. So whether it's plant life or whether it's people life with the businesses, the essential services, there is an ecosystem that functions that does meet the needs of most people in that community. And so we don't believe that independently a person can solve this problem, as I said, but the ecosystem would look like, again, a system that can connect people to data. It would look like the people who implement the laws around the data that they have. It would be the people who are the caregivers who receive the first 1-800 hotline call to say, don't hang up, are you in danger? Stay on the phone with us and we'll call 911 with you. And then later that person gets connected to a supportive service. There should be no disconnect in services when a person is in imminent danger and potentially could experience physical or even more physical or emotional or whatever type of harm is being done. So our goal is to create that type of ecosystem where the water is flowing, the bushes are growing, and so on.
And you alluded to it earlier. I'm really excited to be involved in this and trying to help, not just me, but the army at the Fledge, I guess. Another question I want to take us down a little bit. We're two dudes here talking about this, and most people are going to think in their head, this is an abuser that's a male and an abused person that's a female. And all kinds of complicated things with that. But what's your response to that? Is this a gender thing?
Relationships are definitely not a gender thing or an intergender thing. So we can't determine who would or would not suffer at the hands of the person that they're in a relationship. So we see it all the way from teenagers to people who are men in the workplace. Quite often you don't hear about domestic abuse visiting men because we're big and because we work hard and we control the money. Or sometimes the question may be asked, well, why don't you handle this yourself? Or the other question would be like, what did you do? And we hear that asked to men and women, as though there's something deserving of violence or some type of abuse being planted on them. So I have my own personal story, Jerry. I was, for those people who don't know, I served 22 years in prison, and I entered into a relationship before I was released from prison, and came home in October of 2016. I essentially had to file a personal protection order in December of 2016, which was 2 months later. And we asked the question why people do what they do. While I had a personal protection order in place on January 14th of 2017, I got married to the person I was in an abusive relationship. Now, I will make a concession for all people that what can happen, there's dangers that you can be in a relationship that is toxic, and then that toxicity turns into abuse. And so it may be a two-party thing, it may be a one-party thing, but at the end of the day, our conclusion is that no disputes or even no level of toxicity should turn into abuse and or violence. Yeah. So after being married, 2 weeks after that, I had to make a 911 call and was assaulted. I was punched about 10 times. I was told by the police to stop yelling into the phone while I was being assaulted. The police never came. I had to walk about 2 miles to get home. So I lived under a 4-year parole term where I would hear, watch what I do to you. I'm going to tell your parole officer this. And so we wound up using a lever as my being under the correctional controls as something that was able to be used to keep me in pretty much fear and under control. I made a decision in 2020, December, to leave home. And it's been difficult, but men do experience physical, emotional, psychological, financial abuse. And I would go so far as to say, if there were a demographic of people who suffer in silence from domestic abuse, it would more likely, in my assumption and my argument, and I could bring data to it actually, that men are almost assaulted and subject to domestic abuse as women. We just don't hear anything about it because it's not a popular topic, especially when you see the things that a man is capable to doing to a woman because of his size and stature and strength. We saw a horrible case out of Detroit where a gentleman beat his girlfriend for a while with all the furniture in the house. It's been on the news. So sometimes we're stereotyped that way as we can handle it. But the reality is no person can handle psychological abuse. No person can handle physical abuse. So, we would like to remove the stigma from it and just say that it's okay for a man to say, I've been held in a relationship that I would have liked to believe, but there would have been consequences if I did that, so I stayed. Yeah. And we see those wind up, being fatal toward men also. So it's just one of those things. We like to take the gender out of it because relationships are relationships. And if you ever find a man who's saying, I'm afraid and I'm calling because I need help, I'm in danger, that's something you should also respect equally, because the problem is if you don't, there's a term that we use called pushback. And so what happens when that man calls so many times and he doesn't get the help he needs and he's experiencing psychological trauma? He's not going to make good decisions. And we often see those type of situations wind up turning from the abused becoming the abuser, or at least labeled as it in a courtroom now.
So thank you for sharing your story with us. I mean, that it takes a lot of courage and effort in society to say anything like that if you're a man. So I applaud you for that. I'm on a big campaign to get men to start getting off the sideline, participating, saying what's really happening, and solving these problems as a gender neutral thing, because we all have a role to play. What do you look at when we've got an abuser, we've got somebody being abused? Interesting dynamic when those roles can switch, right? What about the abuser? What do we do for them? Do we cancel them? Do we throw them away? Do we put them in prison? Do we execute them? How do we fix that victim machine? They're sitting there making victims.
So we function, the Coalition to Oppose Domestic Abuse functions from a restorative, not a punitive approach. And what we like to see introduced into the system is that it's not a mediation to reunite the parties involved. It's a mediation that allows us to meet people at the intersection of their trauma and their trouble, and be able to have someone sit down with a person who may be labeled as an abuser at some point in time, who's connected to this type of case, and to say, listen, I'm impartial, I'm neutral, but my job is to try to find out what you need to go forward so we can understand what happened and then what changes you need to make so you can go forward in your life with or without this person. Our belief is that hurt people hurt people. You never know what a person has seen, heard, or experienced in their life that will bring them to the place where they see that abuse being something that works for them. So when you look at like the power and control wheel, you see people who have used different types of abuse. I think there's 8 different sections of it, but I'm kind of losing my thought.
Well, that's all right.
Bring me back.
Well, I'll bring you back this way. We're running out of time right now. We're going to have another show to talk about a lot more. Still want to talk about your organization and the event that we have. But real quick, we got Mr. Joe Walker out there. We call him the champ. What do you recommend for people who have taken and explored all the proper legal channels, but are still consumed by fear in the aftermath?
Well, one good question. The YWCA has a great program for men. I can say that. So that's one place I would say reach out to. The second thing I would say is we're looking to build a network that's not only made of organizations, but also of advocates and individual people. And if you're a person who may be still suffering from the psychological effects or whatever effects of domestic abuse, I would say go to our website and leave our information, or our Facebook page and leave a comment. Our website is www.CODA.com. And one thing that I was able to do with my last place of employment was create a support group, a weekly support group for people who had a loved one that was incarcerated. Mm-hmm. And there's no way my colleague Dana Sloan Bowers and myself are preparing to start airing podcasts. Mm-hmm. But our secondary in tangent with that is to create a support group where people do have a forum to meet people, talk with people. And then because we're trying to do this on such a big scale with the state, we like for people to be able to establish those in their own communities. Right. So if you're a person who needs some support, there is a way that we can help you develop your own supportive community right where you are, because you're not alone.
And so we shared your website, the codamish.com, on the platforms, and we'll share it on the audio as well. March 4th. What are we going to do?
March 4th, thanks again to you and the Fledge here. We will be bringing together a group of people who are of the influencers, the legislators, and the affected. And so we see the legislators are the people who are able to make policies. We have some great policies that have been introduced around domestic abuse that are standing here waiting to be signed by the governor now, or to be introduced to the Senate. We also will have advocates who are doing this type of work so we can bring each other in the room and talk about it. And then the last thing is we want to see, we have the influencers, the advocates, and then the people who are directly impacted. Right. So we're going to hear the stories of people who have suffered at the hands of others, and more importantly, to listen to them, to what did not work for them, and what they can inform us about what they believe would have worked and try to incorporate that into the design that we build to create a truly preventative organization that our matrix and our outcomes start to see the numbers go down. I want to add just one more thing. When we talk about domestic abuse, and I did spend a couple of decades in prison, what we I think should ask ourselves is how many of those people were experiencing abuse somewhere in their life and even in their home? Because what causes a person to wake up on whatever schedule and determined to do violence on whatever schedule? And usually we see it as a result of self-preservation and or a control that works for them. So I would like to say that we talk a lot about reducing the prison population. And what we're doing is we're kind of catching those metaphorical babies that are coming down the river. And what we're saying is, where are these babies coming from? And actually, we can predetermine where they're coming home when the Bureau of Judicial Statistics can say 1, 2, 3 of these children will wind up in prison at some point in time. So we have to really be able to do some type of triage assessment, even in a neonatal care unit in a hospital, to say, is this person at risk of going to prison? How can we interject in their lives now, as opposed to them costing hundreds of thousands of dollars? I'm a $1 million prisoner. They spent $1 million on my incarceration over 22-year period. You have to ask yourself, was there a quicker path for me to be deemed fit to be back in society again, and where we can reallocate those costs, those dollars that we're spending on incarcerating people who, in essence, when you look historically, will be able to say this person has been damaged by the experiences that they had in their life, and they were acting out trauma. And, people do terrible things, but at the end of the day, we're all made in the likeness and image of God. So that's just, we're people. And, without each other, we're not going to make it. But, with each other, we do.
Nobody was born to go to prison.
Absolutely.
Nobody was born to commit violence. We do this as a society, as a community, to people. Yep. One thing I got to say, we're reaching out to all the Lansing people, Voices of Color, Eve, everybody who wants to come. We are not doing this without you. We are not creating something new. We want to introduce you to a potential partnership.
Absolutely.
And get the discussion going. So I want to make sure that that's clear to everybody.
For sure.
Because it's about the strength in the numbers and the diversity of the groups and all of that.
For sure.
So
Can I
shout out to them.
What time are we done?
Oh man, we are so far over.
We're so far over. Well, that was
Let's
what
keep
happened
going.
when you go
We'll
to
keep
church.
Going. Keep
so
going.
We're in a church here, a former church, and structurally speaking, and I just like to touch on a story that we've really kind of used as a foundation to drive us forward. And it's in the Old Testament. There was Babylon. They were building a tower to escape God flooding them and destroying them again. And it was so amazing what they were doing. God came and walked down with Jesus in the spirit and saw that everybody was speaking the same language and doing the same work and of one mind. And he said, this is not good, because they're doing it for the wrong reason. This is not good because anything they can now imagine is possible for them. And so they were working together for one cause, just as we worked together with COVID for one cause. And now we're saying that for one cause, this one cause right here is something that everybody should have the same mind and feelings and actions about at whatever capacity they're able to contribute to that. And then it will be possible for us to have a healthy community, healthy homes, and what we like to call a safe state here in Michigan for people who are in relationships and people who want out of relationships.
You know why I love you? Besides, you're just a decent human being.
You might be a little handsome, maybe sometimes, depends on who's saying.
Yes. You're a system thinker. You're a community builder. You think bigger than yourself. You see a vision. You've got experience overcoming a lot of things and experience making things happen. And it's been an honor to have you on the show. I super appreciate you very much. I'm glad we've reconnected, and I can't wait till March 4th. But even before that, I think you were talking about me when we were talking about software back there in a little bit. We're going to get this moving and we're going to get this working. So if you want to get involved, pay attention to that March 4th event.
March 4th.
Reach out to us. We put the website for CODA Mish up there, and we can't wait to see where this goes, and we can't wait to cut down on these problems, because these problems, as you said, they're, a little kid watching this happen could be a future prisoner, could be a future victim, could be a future abuser, could be involved in gun violence in some way. There's a lot that's happening here that spreads out into the other things we also want to do to protect our community.
I think we've gotten into the business of asking the question, why did this happen? Instead of how can we stop it? Yeah. And there's simple solutions. So, I started my own company too, Rienstra Creative Solutions. Yeah. And that's all we try to find is the simplest solution. I mean, sometimes it's not rocket science.
That's right. All right, everyone. That's another wrap for Every Damn Day. We love you all very much. Take care of each other, help each other out, listen to each other, connect with each other. Connection's the opposite of everything bad, and it always helps. So
treat each other right.
That's right. Treat each other right. Love y'all. See you tomorrow on Every Damn Day.